What the ice concealed, time has begun to reveal. But not all justice happens in this world alone. Sometimes mountains speak and silence screams, and when God's reckoning comes, even the glacier testifies. The wind clawed at their jackets as Hannah tightened her grip on the ice axe. Snow was falling harder now, blotting out the world around them. Below, a vast ocean of white stretched endlessly. Hannah glanced at Luca. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed ahead. Neither had spoken in nearly an hour. They weren't new to this. They had conquered Mont Blanc, crossed the Dolomites in late fall, even attempted a partial winter ascent of the Matterhorn. But this climb, this unmarked route up the back slope of the Barre des Écrins was different. It wasn't on any official record. Luca had insisted it would be pure, untouched, silent, and Hannah had followed. It was supposed to be a week-long trip. They told Elena, Hannah's older sister, they'd check in every evening by satellite phone. But after the third day, the line went dead. No message. No ping. No signal from Summit. Back in Milan, Elena paced in her small apartment, gripping her phone. The voicemail had come an hours late, crackled and faint, as if spoken through a tunnel of ice. Elena, it's me. We saw something. You weren't supposed to. Luca doesn't want to turn back, but The message had cut off. Panic turned into phone calls into reports into an emergency dispatch. French rescue teams launched a search within 12 hours. Helicopters circled the range. Foot patrols combed the known paths. They found nothing. No tent, no gear, no dropped GPS beacon, not even a boot print. A blizzard had swept the mountain that same night, erasing all tracks. They're experienced. One ranger said, could have made a snow shelter, might be alive under there. After 10 days, the official search was suspended. 12 years earlier, Hannah had met Luca at a climbing seminar in Chamonix. She was 25, finishing her graduate thesis in environmental science. He was 32, lean, magnetic, a wilderness photographer with eyes that never settled. They bonded over coffee and compass maps, over shared solitude. Their first climb together ended with frostbitten toes and a kiss under snowfall. By 2013, they were inseparable but secretive. Luca had stopped working with his agency. Hannah left her job at the conservatory without explanation. They'd sold their flat and bought a used Land Rover, traveling between quiet towns, always chasing mountains. Elena had noticed the change. Fewer calls, short messages, vague answers. You okay? She'd asked last time they spoke. We're just tired of the noise, Hannah had replied. I want to disappear for a while. On day 15, the last effort was made. A French team of expert alpinists retraced the supposed route. Nothing. Just a fractured crevasse near the summit. Too deep to investigate safely. A final report filed them as presumed lost due to environmental conditions. Names were etched on a small plaque near the trailhead. Along with a bouquet of frozen lilies Elena left that spring. No bodies were found. No gear. Just that one broken message. Back in Milan, Elena saved the voicemail in 5 different formats. She never stopped listening to it. She always paused at the same words. We saw something we weren't supposed to. A small village nestled under the range. An old shepherd once claimed he'd seen lights flickering on a ridge the night of the storm. No one believed him. He died 2 years later, alone, leaving behind a rusted journal full of symbols and coordinates. No one connected the dots, not until the mountain itself started to melt. 12 winters passed. Each one piled another silent blanket over the peaks. Each storm another white page laid over an unfinished story. Locals stopped talking about the Milan couple who vanished. Search parties gave way to whispered theories. Some claimed the mountain took them. Others believed they had chosen to disappear. By 2025, their names had faded like snow-worn ink on the bronze plaque near the Écrins trailhead. Elena still visited once a year, pressing her palm to Hannah's name. Every time she whispered the same promise, if the mountain doesn't give you back, I'll dig you out myself. She didn't know how close she was. That spring, a freak avalanche struck the upper northeast face after sudden warming caused a shelf to collapse. Ski tourists were caught in it. One survived. The other was never found. Rescue teams arrived with dogs and gear, carving into the debris, racing against daylight. As they searched for the skier, a glint of red surfaced beneath the layers. "Hold up," one rescuer called out, kneeling down. "That's not ski gear." The others gathered. A torn piece of nylon sun-bleached, wine-shredded fluttered from beneath a jagged slab of ice. Red. Faded but unmistakably red dot. They pulled carefully, cutting back the crusted layers. Then, a gasp, a hand, frozen, grayish-white. Male. The wrist twisted unnaturally. But what stopped them wasn't just the condition, it was the black cord wrapped tightly round it. A zip tie. Industrial. They froze. Who ties a climber's hand like that? Someone muttered. Forensic teams were flown in by helicopter. The site was sealed off. Days passed as experts in thermal excavation worked delicately to extract the surrounding ice. What emerged next shocked everyone. A full torso, slumped on its side, arms bent behind as if bound at death. But it wasn't Luca. Dental records ruled him out. Jaw structure, height, and bone density all pointed to a man in his mid-40s, stockier than Luca had been. Not a mountaineer, not in any public missing persons record. Whoever he was, he had died up here long before the storm unearthed. The body was flown to Grenoble. Elena got the call just after midnight. "We've recovered remains," said the voice. "We believe they're connected to your sister's case. She didn't speak. It's not her. But we think she might have been with him. She drove 6 hours straight to the mountain, sleepless. When she saw the piece of red jacket in the evidence bag, her knees buckled. That's Hannah's. I bought it for her. Christmas 2011. I remember." The French prosecutor's office reopened the file. The man's body showed signs of blunt trauma to the back of the head, ligature marks, deep bruising around the ribs. No climbing equipment was found on or near him. No ID, but in his coat lining, there was a torn cigarette wrapper, Swiss brand, and a hotel keycard, warped by moisture. The keycard bore a logo partially visible under UV light. Hotel Adriel, Zurich. Interpol was contacted. That night, Elena stood near the dig site, snowflakes swirling around her. "You were never just lost, were you?" she whispered. "You were running from something." Far above her, the glacier groaned, just a little deeper. In the ice, another secret waited. The autopsy was conducted in a sterile room beneath the Forensic Medicine Institute in Grenoble. Body, though preserved by ice, had begun to show signs of rapid decay, once thawed. Dr. Lemaire, the chief pathologist, worked quietly under the harsh surgical lights. He dictated into his recorder with a calm voice, even as his brow furrowed. Male. Mid to late 40s. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. Ligature marks on wrists and neck. Ribs, 3 fractured, consistent with restraint. Clothing not suited for alpine conditions. Not a climber. Not a tourist. Not even a hiker when they scanned his fingerprints through Interpol. The alert came almost instantly. Name, Marc Delattre. Occupation, unknown. Status, international fugitive. Last seen, Marseille. 2012. Warrant issued. Suspected arms trafficking. Legal border movement, and suspected involvement in a double homicide. Marc Delattre had vanished a year before Hannah and Luca. His body had no business being on that mountain. Authorities quietly reopened the closed case file of Hannah Maffei and Luca Neri. A joint task force was formed between French and Swiss officials. The press wasn't told yet. They needed time. Elena was summoned back to Grenoble. Detective in charge, Captain Beatrice Lemoyne, handed her a printed dossier with Marc's mugshot on the cover. The man in the photo had cold, tired eyes and a scar under his left cheekbone. Elena stared at him for a long time before she said anything. "I've never seen him before. He's a very dangerous man, Ms. Maffei, and he died near your sister." Elena's fingers tightened around the folder. "So this wasn't a climbing accident, was it?" "We don't believe so." They walked her through the timeline. Marc had been spotted in Zurich months before his disappearance. Several eyewitnesses placed him with 2 unidentified individuals, one believed to be a woman with dark hair and an Italian accent. He was also seen in Chamonix the week Hannah and Luca disappeared. Elena felt the floor shift beneath her. "Are you saying Hannah was with him?" "We're saying we don't know, but someone was." For the first time in 12 years, the story began to unfreeze. Elena returned to her hotel room and collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. Memories flickered Hannah's nervous laugh on their last phone call, her vague promises of one last trip, the way Luca had barely spoken that Christmas. Had Hannah gotten involved in something criminal, or worse, had Luca pulled her into? Outside her window, the mountains loomed in the dark. In Marseille, police raided Mark's last known address. Hidden in the basement of the apartment, behind rusted pipes, they found a locked metal briefcase. Inside, foreign currency, a memory card, and a black and white photo. The photo was old but unmistakable. It was Hannah standing beside Luca and a third man. Face turned slightly away. Captain Lemoyne forwarded the image to Elena. She zoomed in. Train in the photo wasn't French. It looked dry, sun-bleached, North African, maybe. And Hannah, she didn't look happy. "That's not my sister," she whispered. "Not the one I remember." Next morning, Elena requested to see her sister's belongings recovered from the glacier. The red jacket fragment, a broken carabiner, and tucked into the side pocket. Something no one had noticed. Before, a torn corner of a topographic map, faded, but marked with a crude black X. She stared at it, heart pounding. Wherever that mark pointed, it might explain everything. The X on the torn map had been a breakthrough, but the trail it marked was still buried in time. Investigators shifted focus to Luca Neri, hoping. Quiet, camera-shy man behind Hannah's disappearance might finally speak through paper and numbers. It began with bank records. Luca's main Italian account had gone inactive shortly after the climb. A Swiss account under a different name, Leonardo Sardo, was flagged during a routine check. With Zurich's financial crime unit, the transactions were small, regular, and precise. Mostly withdrawals, no deposits. One stood out. A €4,000 hotel payment in Zurich, dated January 5, 2013. Just 2 months before the couple vanished. He had stayed under the alias at Hotel Adriel, the same logo found on the melted keycard. In Marc Delatry's coat, that made 3 people: Luca, Hannah, and Mark in the same city, within weeks of each other. Elena sat across from Captain Lemoyne in the Grenoble office, the snow tapping at the windows. Why would he use a fake name? Lemoyne tapped the file with her pen. "We're not sure, but we pulled immigration logs. Luca Sari. Leonardo also entered Morocco that same month. Casablanca. Hannah never mentioned that. We think she didn't know." Investigators found Luca's former climbing partner, Davide Costa, now running a gear shop in Kermere. When they arrived, he looked like he'd been expecting someone for years. "I knew this would come back," he muttered, rubbing his jaw. Luca was a ghost, even before he disappeared. Over black coffee in the back office, Davide confessed to one trip he never reported. In late 2012, Luca had asked him to help transport a sealed duffel bag on a trek across the Swiss-Italian border. Luca never opened it, never explained, just said it belonged to someone important. Davide hadn't asked questions. "He paid me in cash," Davide admitted, said it was for the risk. "Did you know who the client was?" Lemoyne asked. Davide hesitated. "No name, just a meeting place. A cabin near Lauterbrunnen. Snowden." Luca went alone. Came back pale. Meanwhile, digital forensics recovered a single photo from a corrupted memory card in the belongings found. With Mark, the image was dark, grainy, but it showed Luca sitting in what looked like a mountain cabin. His expression was unreadable. The table in front of him, a pistol, 2 passports, and a torn map. Elena stared at the photo for minutes. "That's the same jacket, same one from the dig site. Which means this was taken before they vanished," Lemoyne said. The puzzle sharpened into something colder than ice. Luca had built a double life: aliases, untraceable transactions, connections to a fugitive. But why bring Hannah? Why climb a remote, undocumented route unless there was something to hide? Back in Milan, Elena went through Hannah's old journals. Most entries were personal, reflective, but one, dated February 20th, 2013, stood out. "Luca's acting strange. Late-night calls in a language I don't recognize. Keeps saying we're almost done. I want to believe him, but the mountain feels more honest than he does lately." Interpol traced the alias Leonardo Sardo back to an old travel. Document issued in 2010 through a shell corporation registered in Liechtenstein. The identity had been used in at least 4 countries, mostly for brief visits and cash pickups. This wasn't just some smuggler, said Lemoyne. He was a courier, trusted, invisible. Elena clenched the edge of the desk. You're telling me the man I watched kiss my sister's forehead at Christmas was working for criminals? We're telling you. He may have led her into something he couldn't get her out of. At the edge of a fractured glacier, more meltwater had begun to flow, eroding away the last secrets buried in snow. And soon, something else would surface. Shape caught in a drone's passing lens, metal, tattered fabric, a body still unseen. The summer melt came earlier that year. A French survey team, monitoring glacial retreat on the Bar d'Akrans, noticed something metallic and unnatural. Embedded in the lower ice shelf, an exposed piece of climbing equipment. Drone footage confirmed it. Part of a weathered harness, half buried in a web of fractures. Authorities returned to the site. Crampons dug into old ice as forensic specialists moved in with care. Beneath, for meters of layered snow and glacial debris, they unearthed the remains of a woman curled on her side, frozen in an unnatural angle. Her right arm bent protectively over her ribs. It was Hannah. Her jacket was partially unzipped. Her gloves were missing. And her left boot, tucked beneath the lining, was something else deliberately hidden. A small corner of a topographic map, torn, marked with a crude, black X. Not far from where the first body had been recovered. Ellen arrived hours later, trembling as she stepped onto the sterile floor of the Grenoble morgue. Soft cloth covered the figure on the gurney. Captain Lemoyne offered to confirm identity through DNA, but Elena shook her head. I'll do it. They lifted the cloth. Her sister's features were barely changed, just stilled by time. Lips slightly parted, eyelashes frozen like dusted threads. Elena staggered back, covering her mouth. She looks like she was still trying to breathe. Her voice cracked. She knew they weren't coming back. Autopsy told a story the snow had hidden. Multiple fractures to the ribs and shoulder, none consistent with a climbing fall. Bruising on the wrists, faint ligature marks. A partially crushed radio transmitter was found inside her coat, along the piece of folded paper, unreadable due to water damage. Forensic techs cleaned the transmitter. Dead. Its serial number linked it to a model often used by mountain rescue, except this one had its internal wiring tampered with. It was disabled, Lemoyne confirmed. On purpose. Elena stood at the edge of the morgue parking lot, staring at the map fragment now sealed in a plastic evidence pouch. She didn't fall. She whispered. Someone left her there. Lemoyne nodded, or made sure she couldn't leave. The team began comparing the map to current satellite terrain data. It was clear now the X wasn't a summit or landmark. It marked a ridge near an abandoned cable hut, once used in the 1960s, now buried under heavy snowpack. The location was within hiking distance from both Mark's body and where Luca was last triangulated. It was a triangle of death. And Hannah had marked it. The old journal entries, burner phone numbers, Luca's secret passport. It was all converging into a narrative that no one wanted to believe. Maybe she tried to warn us, Elena said. Maybe that map was all she could leave behind. We'll send a ground team, Lemoyne assured her. We'll dig until we know what's there. As they zipped Hannah's body into a transport bag, the sky darkened with fast-moving clouds. A storm was coming, the kind that stripped away tracks and memory alike. But this time, the mountain wasn't keeping its secrets. It was letting go. Far above, in the untouched ridge marked on the map, wind howled through narrow stone corridors. A shape lay hidden under packed snow, metallic, sun-bleached, and ripped. The seams, a single rope dangled from the edge of a rock, swaying like a pendulum, waiting to be seen. Interpol's digital crime unit in Lyon was the first to match Marc Delatry's fingerprint to a sealed case file dating back to 2011. A shipment of illicit arms intercepted in Morocco. Delatry had been working under a false name, connected to a network supplying black market weapons across North Africa and Eastern Europe. The operation collapsed, but several names had slipped away, including the buyer who financed the deal. One. Those names surfaced again. Alain Freudevaux, Swiss-born, former mercenary. Discharged dishonorably after a mission in the Balkans. Officially retired. Officially, a ghost who bought and sold information, weapons, and silence. Interpol flagged a surveillance video dated November 18, 2012, from Hotel Audrey L in Zurich. In the clip, timestamped 1:47 a.m., Hannah was seen standing in the dim hallway wearing a dark coat, visibly distressed. She was arguing with a man in a wool trench coat. Tall, grizzled beard, an ex-soldier's posture. Never raised his voice, but his stance was predatory, blocking her from leaving. When the man stepped into view, facial recognition confirmed it. Alain Freud-Deveau. Elena watched the footage on a laptop in the Grenoble station, her hands trembling. Over the keyboard, "That's her, that's Hannah. And that man, he's not Luca." Captain Lemoyne nodded gravely. "We believe she was there with both of them. Not by choice. Why didn't she leave? Why didn't she call me? Because by then, she was already into deep." Hotel records revealed that all three Marc Delattre, Alain Freud-Deveau, and Luca Neri had stayed at the Adriel under different aliases, separate floors, 3 nights in the same building. But something had fractured. Room service logs showed only one person ordered food for 2, Luca. On the second night, the next day, Alain vanished. No formal checkout, no credit card activity. His room was left untouched, the sheets still crisp. The ashtray cold. In Geneva, a retired military operative came forward anonymously. He had worked with Freud-Deveau during a private security contract. Syria, the man didn't trust anyone, he told investigators. Carried cash, used no phones, and only traveled with people he had leverage on. What kind of leverage? Family, debt, secrets. Freud-Deveau knew how to own people without chains. Elena stared at the printed photo Interpol had recovered. From the briefcase hidden in Marc's old apartment, a black and white still of Hannah, Luca, and an unidentified man standing near a burned-out truck in what looked like a desert checkpoint. Was that Morocco? "We believe so," Lemoyne replied, "and we believe Alain took them there. But why would Hannah go? She may not have had a choice, or she followed Luca, thinking he was in danger." In a Zurich bar not far from the hotel, a former bartender confirmed seeing Freud-Deveau meet Luca several times in late 2012. Their conversations were always short, but tense. He called him Il Piccione, the pigeon, like he was a courier. The term stuck with Elena. Courier, not criminal, not killer, but a carrier of something dangerous. Interpol issued a European-wide alert for Freud-Deveau, but it was more of a formality. He hadn't been seen since early 2013. Some believed he was dead. Others believed he had simply moved deeper underground. But then, something surfaced. Literally. At the site marked on Hannah's map. Beneath layers of snow and time, search teams uncovered part of a second body. The skull was fractured. The jaw had a dental implant matching Freud-Deveau's known records. He was no ghost anymore. He had died on that mountain. Elena stood at the ridge as they hoisted the remains. From the ice, to men dead, my sister in between. And Luca, still out there. Lemoyne looked out over the silent glacier. If Freud-Deveau didn't kill her, and Marc didn't, there's only one person left. The snow fell in slow spirals, ghosting over the narrow path as Jacques Morel, a retired alpine guide now in his 70s, adjusted his boots and climbed toward the refuge hut he had once frequented every winter. It had been over a decade, but the memories still clung to the creaking boards of that old shelter like ice on stone. Back in 2013, Jacques had set out for a solo retreat in the mountains, as he often did when the world below became too loud. He remembered the storm that week vividly, the sudden whiteout, the eerie silence that followed. It's when he'd arrived at the hut and found it already occupied. There was a woman sitting near the hearth, her hands wrapped in bloodied bandages, writing frantically in a leather notebook. Across from her sat a man who wouldn't speak, just stared into the fire like it had answers he was too afraid to say aloud. A third man lay on a bench, barely conscious, blood soaking through his jacket. Air was tense, the kind of tension Jacques had only felt once before in a war zone. They didn't look like mountaineers, Jacques wrote in his journal. Their gear was mismatched. The man, tall, hollow-cheeked, kept his hand near his coat like something was hidden inside. The woman, she looked terrified. She kept whispering, again and again, "Don't trust Luca, don't trust him." Jacques didn't ask questions that night. He merely shared his food, made space by the fire, and left at dawn. The memory had haunted him ever since, but he'd buried it until recently. The image on the news, a recovered photo of Hannah, smiling in a red down jacket before the fatal climb, had frozen him in place. The woman by the fire. It had been her. Now Jacques stood before investigators in Annecy, journal trembling in his gloved hands. Elena was in the room too, her face pale but steady. She recognized the handwriting in the photo Jacques had taken of the journal entry. It was Hannah's, word for word, the same jagged script that had filled Hannah's old diaries since she was a child. The investigators leaned forward as Jacques recounted everything. The odd flicker of recognition in the wounded man's eyes. The way the silent man, presumably Luca, wouldn't meet Hannah's gaze. There was fear between them, and not the kind nature brings. "Did you see where they went?" one of the officers asked. Jacques shook his head. "No, when I came back 3 days later, the hut was empty, but something else they'd etched. A message on the wooden table. It was carved in the wood with a knife." He pulled out a second photograph, grainy, but legible. The words, "If this is found, look past the summit." Elena leaned closer, whispering. She left a trail. She knew someone would come. Forensics teams immediately dispatched crews to the hut. There, they found a few scraps of bloodied gauze in the cracks of the floorboards. DNA tests later confirm D1 sample belonged to Elaine Freudeveau, the rest inconclusive. But what truly shifted the case was what lay beneath a loose board under the bunk. A rusted metal box, sealed tight. Inside, another torn piece of the same topographic map found in Hannah's boot, this time showing a network of trails beyond the summit, paths not marked on any official route. As officers pored over the markings, Elena stared at the initials, written faintly on the corner of the map, HL Hannah Luca, or Hannah alone. She stepped out into the snow, heart pounding. Glacier might have buried the truth for 12 years. But Hannah had been digging a way out the entire time, inside the cabin. One officer turned to another and said, "This wasn't an accident. This was an escape gone wrong." The wind howled low through the glacial pass as search teams returned from the hut, with something extraordinary, a weatherproof notebook, thick and scarred, its bright red cover dulled by time and snow. It had been wedged between two jagged rocks, almost invisible beneath a melt channel runoff. If it hadn't been for a sunbeam hitting its metal clasp just right, it would have been missed entirely. Inside the forensic tent at base camp, Elena stood rigid as the notebook was unsealed. Her hands itched to touch it, but gloves and protocols kept her at a distance. Still, even from across the table, she could tell it was Hannah's, the inked initials on the inside cover. Tiny hearts drawn in the margins, the slanted E in her handwriting. It was unmistakable. The pages were warped but intact, written in waterproof ink that had held up against more than a decade of snow and silence. Investigators turned the first few pages gently. The early entries were dated mid-July 2013, just before the family was officially declared missing. July 14th, "We shouldn't have come this far. Luca keeps pushing north, insists there's a route no one knows about. Says it'll be faster. But Elaine is hurt, and I don't believe Luca anymore. Something changed after we reached the second ridge. I see it in his eyes. July 15th, Elaine. Blood through the night. He says he slipped, but I saw the rock sharp, yes, but no trail of blood leading up, only down. He won't say what happened. He keeps looking at Luca like he's waiting for something." Anna clutched her own arm as if the cold had broken through her coat. She recognized the tone in her sister's words, conflicted, fearful, laced with restraint, as if Hannah had wanted to scream, but only had pages to whisper to. July 16th, he says we're too deep to turn back, no trails left. But that's not true. I saw the path Jacques mentioned, past the summit, down the hollow basin. I marked it on the corner of the topo map, just in case. That map, the torn corner they'd found hidden in the hut, now made sense. Hannah had been trying to lead anyone to where they might have gone. The entries grew increasingly fragmented after that, some written mid-hike, others possibly hiding. July 18th, Elaine asked me last night if I heard Luca. And the man talking. What man? There's no one else out here. Unless, that was it for that day. July 19th, he said, if we vanish, people will call it an accident. It's not. If anyone finds this, don't let them tell you it was just the mountain. The mountain didn't do this. People did. The air in the tent turned heavy. The investigators exchanged glances, the implications unraveling fast. This wasn't a simple disappearance, nor a tragic misstep. It was something else, something deliberate. July 20th, last night I heard Luca whispering. He thinks I'm asleep. He said when she sleeps, we'll finish this. He's talking about. Hey, I don't know what he wants, but I won't wait to find out. There was a smeared fingerprint on the next page. Blood, partially frozen in the grain of the paper. Final entry undated. I'm going to try the hollow pass. If I make it, I'll leave markers. If I don't, maybe this will help someone understand. Just don't trust Luca. He smiles with a knife in his hand. Elena's eyes stung, but she didn't cry, not yet. The notebook had done what her sister couldn't: survive, speak, warn. The lead investigator finally spoke, voice grave. We need to go past the summit. Whatever happened, whatever. She saw it's there. With that, the teams began preparing for a new Route 1, no map charted. But one Hannah had left written in fear, in blood, and in hope. The recovery of Hannah's notebook changed everything, but what came next would challenge even the most seasoned investigators. Just days after her final entry was translated and entered into evidence, a drone from a mountaineering documentary crew caught an anomaly during a flyover. Near the southern ridge of the Aiguille Noire de Puterie, an unforgiving part of the Mont Blanc, Massif, a discolored patch of ice caught the afternoon sun. It shimmered unnaturally, as if something man-made lay beneath. Within hours, a specialized alpine recovery unit was dispatched, armed with heat-penetrating LiDAR and portable melt tools. They dug cautiously, uncovering the collapsed remnants of a tent flattened and buried beneath years of compacted snow. The site was fragile, preserved in glacial frost. Among the shards of torn canvas and twisted aluminum poles lay two objects that made the team freeze in place: a blood-stained climbing axe and a jacket ripped straight down the back. The initials inside the collar were unmistakable: L.F. Luca Ferrero. Elena was brought to the site but asked to wait at the base camp. A forensics team was flown in immediately to process the scene. The climbing axe, though corroded, still held fragments of organic matter. Forensic biologist on site carefully extracted the fibers, noting distinct bloodstains on the edge of the axe head and on the tent fabric near the entry flap. Back at the lab, the tests came in quicker than expected. One set of blood matched Lane Freud-Deveau, the mercenary from Zurich who had vanished without a trace the same summer. Hannah and Luca disappeared. The revelation didn't end there. A second sample mixed with Freud-Deveau's was analyzed, and though it failed to match Luca's DNA, it wasn't entirely untraceable. Interpol's system flagged it as a familial match to Remy Caston, a known trafficker from Lyon, presumed dead after a shootout in 2011. But no body had ever been recovered. Could Caston have survived and resurfaced during that fateful climb? As officials pieced together the timeline, new questions emerged. If Hannah's journal was correct, Luca had entered into something dangerous long before the climb. Her notes hinted at a betrayal, but not just by strangers. She feared someone close, someone who'd led them into the trap. And now, with Caston's partial DNA at the scene, it was evident there had been more than just a lover's getaway or an unlucky climb gone wrong. The scene told a brutal story. The torn jacket suggested Luca had struggled violently or had been attacked, but there was no trace of his body, no skeletal remains, no scattered gear. Nothing to suggest he had died there. Yet what unnerved investigators most was the position of the tent's ruins. It wasn't a campsite set for safety or rest. It faced a sheer vertical drop, one typically avoided by experienced climbers. Had been trying to escape someone, or had someone driven them to that edge? Photos were taken, evidence bagged, and the climbing axe sent to Interpol's forensic division. Elena, pacing below at the lower refuge, could feel her pulse in her ears. She hadn't slept in days. When she saw the team descending, she ran to them, her eyes pleading. "They find him?" she asked, voice cracking. The lead investigator shook his head. Not yet. But someone else was there, and they bled too. Elena's breath caught. Then it wasn't just them. No, the officer said quietly. This was a war zone, up there in the ice, as the wind howled down the glacier, sweeping over the ruined camp once hidden beneath years of silence. Something colder than snow settled in Elena's bones. If Luca was alive when he left that. And where had he gone next? Just before the team packed up for the descent, one of the younger techs called out, "Sir, there's a rope trail here. Looks like someone climbed down alone." And with that, the investigation took one more step into the abyss. The Ridge Camp discovery had shaken investigators, but one question loomed larger than the bloodstain. Axe or the DNA fragments buried beneath ice. What happened after the camp fell silent? Interpol's cross-border task force began reconstructing the timeline, surrounding the couple's final hours, with glacial thaw patterns dated. They could narrow down the night of the incident. Forensic meteorologists helped confirm visibility conditions, while digital forensics specialists sifted through historic satellite snapshots taken by government and commercial satellites between midnight and 5 a.m. That's when they found it. At 3:17 a.m., a thermal blip appeared on the Italian side of the range, too far from the couple's camp to be accidental. The figure moved erratically eastward, downhill before vanishing into dense tree cover. The resolution was grainy, but its movement was human. Investigators marked it as their most viable lead, a potential escape route. They began interviewing anyone still living within proximity of the forest trail that summer. Most led nowhere until a name surfaced from a forgotten guestbook. Simone Raggi, now 78, still ran her chalet near the foothills of Val d'Irames. She vividly remembered. That cold night, the wind had roared like it carried voices, and her dog wouldn't stop barking. She'd opened her door just after 4 a.m. to find a man, soaking wet and trembling, asking in broken Italian if there was a phone. No signal here, she had told him, pointing to the rusted landline inside. He never used it. Instead, he sat at the fireplace, warming his hands in silence when she offered him tea. He barely sipped before rising and mumbling thanks. Then he vanished into the dark. Did he give a name? Investigator asked. She frowned, eyes narrowing with age and memory. He left behind a glove. She said. It had initials L. Interpol compared her description to photos of Luca, cross-referencing height, build, and facial hair. Her recollection aligned, but one detail stood out. She remembered a smear of dried blood on his pant leg. Forensic geolocation matched the thermal signature's direction with terrain analysis. There was only one feasible path down from the camp that could have led to the chalet in such time. And it wasn't the main trail. It was a narrow, dangerous descent. Locals called La Boca dell'Umbra, the mouth of shadow used only. The poachers and smugglers. A week later, search teams scoured that route. Halfway down, buried under moss and slate, they found a discarded climbing harness with a torn buckle and faint traces of blood. Lab results showed it belonged to Luca. More shockingly, the blood matched the unknown DNA found at the Ridge Camp. The missing hour, it seemed, wasn't missing anymore. Luca had escaped injured, terrified, and possibly responsible for more than just fleeing a bad deal. Interpol dug deeper into the final moments before the couple's presumed deaths. A Swiss border camera had captured a black SUV exiting the vicinity around dawn. The vehicle was traced to a shell company dissolved in 2014, one that had paid Freud DeVoe as a consultant. It was all converging. Back in her flat, Elena sat alone, rereading Hannah's notebook. One line haunted her more than the rest. If we vanish, don't believe it was an accident. She turned to the last page and noticed something faint, nearly erased by time and damp. Grid coordinates, not matching the campsite, not matching any known location on file. Close, she circled the coordinates with a trembling pen and whispered, "Then where did he go?" She picked up the phone. "It's not over," she said to the detective. "I think I know where he was trying to get." 12 years had passed, but the mountain hadn't forgotten. For most of that time, Elena had believed Luca was either dead or a ghost in some remote corner of the world, lost, hunted, or in hiding. But the last few weeks had stripped away the comforting ambiguity. Truth was colder than the snow that buried the ridge camp. Interpol's latest dig through sealed financial archives had cracked open something damning. A hidden Swiss account untouched since August 12 years ago had been opened under a false name, linked to Luca's expired passport. Multiple deposits in irregular intervals matched payouts from a now-defunct security consultancy, once tied to Freud DeVoe. A financial forensics report concluded the account had received hush money. Someone was silencing loose ends or paying off an accomplice. The final transaction occurred 2 days after the couple vanished, but it was the DNA evidence that silenced the room during the case briefing. A hair sample recovered from the inside hood of Hannah's jacket previously graded to analyze was now confirmed to be Luca's. It placed him directly behind her, close enough to be helping her climb, close enough to push Dot, and then came the final blow. During an archival digitization of Hannah's personal effects seized and sealed by the Austrian consulate, a letter fell from between the pages of a water-damaged sketchbook, addressed to Elena, never mailed, ink blurred, but legible. If you read this, I didn't make it. I saw something I wasn't supposed to. I think Luca knew. I'm scared. Tell my mother I loved her. And if they say I fell, don't let them bury the truth. With me. Handwriting was unmistakably Hannah's. The tremble in her pen strokes revealed what she couldn't say aloud. She'd sensed betrayal closing in. Her own fate. Elena stared at the letter for hours. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. There was no joy in being right, only a deeper hollowing. She visited the old family home that afternoon, the place where Hannah had spent her last Christmas. Before the trip, walls still smelled like pine wood and dust. In her childhood room, the posters remained intact, climbing legends, Himalayan summits, and maps annotated with her dreams. Elena reached into Hannah's old gear trunk and found a faded photo wedged behind a compass dot. It was the three of them: Hannah, Luca, Freud DeVoe, smiling at the base of the Alps. Younger, lighter, before secrets devoured them, but something odd stood out. Behind them, half visible in the frame, was a man watching from tree line, bald, tall, dressed in dark hiking gear. Not Freud DeVoe, not Luca, not anyone Elena could name. She scanned the image into her tablet and enhanced it. The stranger's gaze was fixed directly on the trio. He wasn't passing by. He was watching. She sent the image to the lead investigator. Within an hour, she got a reply. We've seen him before. French national, known fixer. Name's Etienne Moreau. He disappeared 6 months after your sister. Moreau. Another name buried in the frost of a conspiracy that now reached further than anyone had feared. As snow began falling outside the window, Elena sat on the porch and reread Hannah's letter aloud. Her voice cracked only once on the word truth. Somewhere there, Luca might still be alive, but even if he wasn't, someone had protected him. Someone powerful. Someone still watching. The cold truth wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what hadn't been allowed to happen. But now the silence was cracking, and Elena wasn't going to stop. As the glacier continued to thaw, so did the story, slowly, brutally, and without mercy. Every few weeks, mountain rescue teams reported finding new fragments: a torn section of a tent, a cracked climbing helmet, scraps of paper barely readable. Ice, which once protected secrets in silence, was now releasing them one at a time, as if the mountain had finally grown tired of carrying the weight. But while the earth gave back what it could, the most painful truths remained locked in memory. Elena stood at the ridge above the drop where her sister had vanished. Her boots sank slightly into the softening ice. The wind howled through the gorge, echoing like a ghost still searching for a name. She had been here dozens of times before, but this moment felt different. Not like closure, just clarity. 12 years ago, they were three silhouettes climbing toward a summit they would never reach. Now, two were gone, and one stood holding their stories like broken glass. Every piece cut her fingers, but she wouldn't let go. Behind her, a fresh memorial plaque glinted against the stone. It bore no names, just an inscription in both French and English: not all trails lead home. Some become the truth. Elena hadn't written it, but it felt right. The words were carved by someone who had also lost too much up here. Down in the valley, A journalist named Nadia had begun piecing together her own version of the story. Her article titled "The Glacier That Remembers" was scheduled for publication into languages. It was careful, not accusatory, but it named Luca. It referenced Freud-Devaux's controversial military background. It hinted at hush funds, encrypted calls, and the politics of disappearing quietly. Elena didn't read the article. She didn't need to. She had lived it. She looked up at the melting wall of ice beside her, streaked now with ash and time. Somewhere within it, Hannah's final days had played out, maybe in terror, maybe in surrender, maybe fighting back. And yet Elena refused to believe it had ended in helplessness. Hannah's last letter was fear, yes, but also defiance. Her words, buried for over a decade, had outlived the ones who tried to silence them. Not everything survives. Thaw, but some truths are too stubborn to stay frozen. And love, no matter how bruised or betrayed, does not rot in the cold. It waits, patiently, quietly. Like the mountain itself, Elena pulled the small mirror from her coat pocket. One she'd tied to a tree branch months ago as a signal, now scratched and dulled. It still caught the light. She angled it toward the horizon, letting it flash once into the sky. Not for rescue. Not for hope. Just as proof that she was still. Still remembering. Still watching. In the distance, thunder rolled. A storm was coming. She tucked the mirror back into her pocket and began the descent. The path was slippery, riddled with melt pools and shifting ice, but she didn't look back. Not this time. The mountain had offered its truth. It wasn't kind. It wasn't whole. There was something. Below, the village bells began to chime, and somewhere, perhaps buried in a glacier, not yet ready to speak, Luca's story waited for the right season. A colder one, or maybe a warmer one. But until then, Elena carried both. Silence and the scream. And as the glacier continued to thaw, the truth unfreezes with it layer by layer. But some things stay buried deeper than ice: betrayal, love, and the cost of silence.